The American desert is known for its burning sand, dry winds, and a silence so heavy it feels unshakable. But that silence was recently torn apart by the roar of engines in the night, a mysterious convoy crossing the border and heading straight into Arizona. These were not the usual smugglers. This was a heavily armed force, moving like a military unit, carrying drugs, weapons, and a direct challenge to the United States. This time, everything was different. Instead of hiding, they chose to confront. Instead of retreating, they brought war across the border. The dark night of the Sonoran Desert suddenly turned into the stage for a clash never seen before on American soil. What could push a cartel as infamous as Sinaloa to take such a reckless gamble? Why would they risk sending more than 300 fighters with armored vehicles deep into Arizona? And more importantly, how would the United States respond to an act of aggression like this? Let's discover the truth with Military Power. Don't forget to subscribe to Military Power and join us as we uncover the weapons, strategies, and political choices behind this new war on cartels. Now let's get back to the video. The silence of the Sonora Desert was shattered when more than 300 armed men from the Sinaloa cartel crossed into Arizona. This was not a small smuggling mission. It looked more like an invading force prepared for battle. At the front of the convoy were 3 armored command vehicles. Behind them rolled 18 military trucks and 24 SUVs fitted with mounted heavy machine guns. 4 armored vehicles carried mobile air defense systems, while 6 refrigerated containers were packed with 2.7 tons of fentanyl. That amount of drugs could kill over 200 million people, showing the scale of the threat. The men inside these vehicles were not ordinary traffickers. They were hardened Sinaloa gunmen, supported by Colombian mercenaries and former soldiers with battlefield experience. Their weapons included M4 rifles, PKM machine guns, grenade launchers, and shoulder-fired missiles, enough to match a small army in firepower. The convoy even included electronic warfare specialists and small kamikaze drones. These units were ready to jam signals, confuse surveillance, and protect the column as it moved through the desert. With this combination of manpower and technology, the Sinaloa cartel sent a clear message. It was no longer hiding in the shadows. It was openly challenging the United States on its own soil. Yet the question remains, why would a cartel risk so much in such an audacious way? The answer lies in a wider pattern of provocation and weak deterrence. The decision to march into Arizona was not random. It reflected a pattern that has been growing for years. When cartels feel unchecked, they escalate from smuggling in secret to violent raids and cross-border attacks. The roots of this problem are not only inside Mexico's corruption, they also come from Washington's inconsistent approach to border security. Weak deterrence at the highest level has allowed these groups to believe they can push further without fear. Every hesitation in policy becomes an opening for cartels to exploit. The convoy moving across the desert was therefore more than just an attempt to move drugs. It was a declaration that the cartel could mobilize like a paramilitary force and strike inside the United States. For them, this mission was an act of revenge for the DEA raid that had disrupted fentanyl routes 2 weeks earlier. But for ordinary Americans, the picture was much darker. It showed that criminal groups now have the size, weapons, and discipline to operate like real military units. This is no longer about drug smuggling, it is about security and sovereignty. Transition. To understand what triggered this reckless gamble, we must go back 2 weeks earlier, when one DEA operation set off the chain of events that led to the desert incursion. The decision to send an armed convoy into Arizona began with a raid 2 weeks earlier. On July 29th, the Drug Enforcement Administration, working with the Mexican military, struck a fentanyl hub in cartel territory. It was one of the largest seizures in years, showing that American intelligence had penetrated deep into Sinaloa's network. Agents seized more than 40 tons of precursor chemicals, enough to produce billions of dollars worth of fentanyl. 17 technicians were arrested, including the son of a senior commander. For the Sinaloa leadership, this was more than a financial hit. It was a humiliation that exposed their weakness. What hurt most was not the loss of supplies, but the sudden sense of betrayal inside Mexico. For years, the cartel relied on corruption and secret deals with officials to shield operations. The raid shattered that shield. Leaders believed insiders had betrayed them or sold information to the Americans. The idea that the Mexican state could no longer be controlled left them furious and paranoid. Doing nothing was not an option. Rivals like the Jalisco cartel would see weakness, and their own fighters would lose faith. A cartel that cannot inspire fear quickly loses territory and profit. That is why the raid was seen not only as an attack on business, but as an insult to their authority and a direct challenge to survival. To restore control, the leadership turned to violence and prepared a bold counterattack. In early August, leaders approved Operation Roto. Its goals were symbolic: destroy border checkpoint 13 in Arizona, reopen a fentanyl route through the Chila Mountains, and send a bloody warning to Washington and Mexico City. The orders were issued on August 9th with a strict 90-minute timeline: attack, recover ground, and withdraw before dawn. At the center was Salvador Eli Carranza. He was notorious for more than 50 assassinations in Culiacan and for running drug networks across Arizona, Nevada, and New Mexico. The United States had already placed a $10 million bounty on his head. His presence was meant to inspire confidence and prove the leadership was ready for revenge. The convoy assembled for the mission reflected this ambition. It included armored command vehicles, military trucks, SUVs with mounted weapons, air defense systems, and containers filled with fentanyl. This was not a smuggling run. It was a military-style raid. Yet even with Carranza in command, the strategy was driven more by image than realistic calculation. For Sinaloa, Operation Roto was not only retaliation. It was an attempt to save face, rebuild fear, and project sovereignty. By striking the United States directly, they hoped to restore their reputation and show that no raid could break them. But this gamble ignored the reality of U.S. power. A criminal syndicate, even with hundreds of fighters and heavy weapons, could not match the surveillance and planning of the U.S. military. What seemed like strength was, in fact, a march into disaster. What the cartel did not know was that every route, every encrypted call, and every movement had already been tracked by U.S. intelligence. A trap named Killbox Bravo had been prepared, waiting for the moment when Sinaloa's defiance would lead them straight into American crosshairs. The incursion into Arizona was no surprise for U.S. planners. American intelligence had been following the cartel's networks for more than a year. Analysts at the Department of Defense and the Border Analysis Center tracked fake phone accounts, intercepted satellite coordinates, and mapped the routes used by cartel drivers. Over time, these fragments built a clear picture of how convoys moved across northern Mexico. This patient work turned into an operational plan. By studying repeated resupply patterns, U.S. officials could predict not just when the cartel would move, but how. What seemed like isolated pieces of information became the blueprint for a larger trap, one that could be sprung at the right time with precision. That blueprint then shaped a hidden boundary across the desert, a line the cartel would cross without even knowing it existed. To turn surveillance into action, NORAD and allied agencies created a virtual fence using buried magnetic and seismic sensors. These devices were small, easy to hide, and linked to a central command system. When a heavy vehicle crossed the line, the sensors transmitted precise coordinates, silently marking the convoy's position. Unlike traditional barriers, this boundary could not be seen or avoided. It did not rely on walls or checkpoints, but on science and signal. In practice, the Sonora Desert itself became a tripwire. Every dune, cactus, and stretch of sand was wired to listen, creating an environment where the enemy was exposed before the battle began. With the border transformed into a silent alarm, U.S. commanders needed forces ready to strike the moment that alarm went off. Roughly 3,000 U.S. personnel were positioned in the desert, divided into 14 tactical clusters. Each cluster blended different strengths: SEAL Team 6 and Delta Force for surgical raids, Rangers and Marines for fast assaults, the 82nd Airborne for rapid reinforcement, and electronic warfare teams to shut down communications. Together, they formed a layered net, capable of overwhelming any response. These troops held their positions for 40 hours, enduring desert heat and dust without revealing their presence. No reconnaissance drones flew, and no patrol planes circled above. By avoiding obvious movements, the Americans preserved the element of surprise. Camouflage and disciplined silence allowed the entire force to remain invisible, waiting for the cartel to drive directly into their hands. The discipline displayed underscored not only tactical patience, but also the professionalism of a military force trained to fight wars far larger than this operation. This level of secrecy showed that Killbox Bravo was not an ambush improvised in the moment, but a carefully engineered machine. Killbox Bravo combined intelligence, sensors, and firepower into a single design. Each sensor was linked to command, and each command linked to artillery, UAVs, and special operations teams. The system worked like clockwork: detection, confirmation, and destruction all within seconds. It was not only about weapons, but about choreography. By tying technology and soldiers into one real-time net, the United States ensured that the cartel's every move was predicted and pre-assigned a response. Months of preparation allowed a strike that looked effortless when it finally unfolded, even though the complexity behind it was enormous. And when the first wheel touched a buried sensor, the entire silent war machine came alive at once. When the buried sensor sent its signal, the entire plan snapped into motion, and the first strikes arrived within seconds. That single pulse linked sensor data to command, and a HIMARS battery responded with multiple GMLRS rockets aimed at the convoy's command node, destroying the second command vehicle and shattering the column's ability to coordinate. Those rockets were chosen for speed and armor penetration, and their impact immediately disoriented drivers and escorts, creating gaps that a well-timed follow-up could exploit. At the same time, precision shooters moved to eliminate key personnel, and long-range snipers from SEAL Team 6 targeted gunners and vehicle commanders to prevent any organized return fire. The artillery and sniper pairing was deliberate. Indirect fire broke the convoy's structure, while precision marksmen removed the human capacity to fix or operate heavy weapons. Together, these elements ensured the cartel could not reform an effective defense. With command degraded and fighters losing cohesion, unmanned strike systems and focused ground teams moved in to finish critical targets. Following the opening salvo, loitering munitions and portable anti-armor weapons struck selected vehicles to remove remaining mobile threats. Switchblade 600 drones executed small, precise attacks on trucks mounting heavy machine guns, detonating on impact and neutralizing those most capable of pushing back. At the same time, small Delta Force teams used Carl Gustaf systems to breach at least one refrigerated container, destroying its integrity and causing a catastrophic release of material that created a blinding white cloud. That cloud had both tactical and psychological effects. It obscured sight, choked escort teams, and triggered panic, which fragmented any effort to regroup. While the drones and anti-armor strikes removed the convoy's hardpoints, the combination of material release and smoke turned the battlefield into chaos, making coordinated movement impossible and increasing casualties among those who tried to flee. As systems and munitions did their work above and on the surface, another layer of deadly engineering detonated beneath the convoy. Beneath the convoy, sequenced Claymore and M15 charges detonated in a fan pattern timed to each vehicle's arrival, so the explosions propagated through the column and isolated sections from one another. These programmed charges were intended to trap drivers behind disabled vehicles and to amplify the overall damage profile, and they worked exactly as planned by turning narrow passages into lethal funnels. Finally, Heavy caliber precision fire, including 50 caliber rounds, eliminated remaining weapon stations and finishing targets at long range, making any counterattack suicidal. Within minutes, many vehicles were burning, others were immobilized, and organized resistance collapsed into scattered pockets. The result was not a chaotic firefight, but a calculated tactical execution where each system complemented the others to produce a rapid, irreversible defeat of the convoy. But this was only the first layer of the trap, because invisible weapons, electronic attack, spoofing, and signal denial were still waiting to deepen the cartel's collapse. The collapse of the cartel convoy was not driven only by artillery and snipers, but also by invisible weapons that made no sound. U.S. electronic warfare teams attacked the lifelines of the enemy, transforming every signal into a deadly trap. At the center of this hidden war was the 75th Digital Warfare Brigade, supported by NSA and DIA analysts. They deployed the REAP-X system, built to scramble, spoof, and silence communications on a massive scale. Radios, GPS units, and satellite links became as vulnerable as trucks and armored vehicles. Once those systems were neutralized, the cartel lost its ability to see, talk, or guide drones. Confidence turned into panic as fighters realized they were entering a domain they could not fight, where every invisible wave carried the power to destroy. The first strike came through GPS interference. Cartel navigation units reported false positions, while drones spiraled out of control and fell into the sand. Without those eyes in the sky, the convoy was blind to ambushes ahead. Then the spoofing phase began. U.S. operators injected false coordinates that redirected vehicles into carefully prepared minefields. What looked like an escape route became a corridor of death built from digital deception. At the same time, broad jamming silenced every frequency from 300 to 900 megahertz. Commanders could not issue orders, call for help, or regroup their units. Entire platoons were isolated within seconds, uncertain whether the voices they heard were real or false. Meanwhile, U.S. forces maintained a secure and clear network, which allowed them to coordinate faster than ever. The cartel's chain of command collapsed under the weight of silence, leaving fighters scattered and leaderless in the desert night. The final stage of this invisible net was passive sensing. ASA mini radars scanned the desert, detecting engine vibrations, weapon discharges, and even body heat from fighters hiding among rocks. These details created a living map of the battlefield. Every vibration and flash of gunfire was instantly converted into coordinates and relayed to artillery and drone teams. Each movement by the cartel, from opening a vehicle door to firing a rifle, gave away their position and triggered precise strikes that tore through vehicles and squads alike. The effect was devastating. Deprived of communications, misled by false maps, and exposed by their own noise, the convoy disintegrated into isolated targets. What began as a bold incursion turned into a fragmented retreat. The lesson was undeniable. In modern war, silence and signals can kill faster than bullets, leaving behind only wreckage and confusion. And when that chaos reached its peak, the final clamp of Killbox Bravo closed. The battle in the Sonora Desert did not last long. In just 93 minutes, the most ambitious cartel convoy to cross into U.S. territory was reduced to wreckage and silence. What began with more than 300 gunmen, dozens of armored vehicles, and tons of fentanyl ended with smoke rising over 3 kilometers of desert ground. It was a short, brutal fight that showed how preparation and technology can erase a threat almost instantly. By the time the final explosions faded, over 300 cartel fighters were killed or captured. Their weapons lay scattered, and their modified vehicles burned under the morning sky. 46 armored trucks and SUVs were destroyed, while 6 containers carrying nearly 3 tons of fentanyl were torn open and set ablaze. That narcotic cargo, enough to kill 200 million people, was destroyed before it could poison American streets. Most striking was the absence of U.S. casualties. 3,000 troops took part, including special forces, airborne units, and electronic warfare teams, yet not a single soldier was lost. This coordination came from months of tracking routes, studying signals, and preparing layered firepower. When the trap was triggered, every element moved in harmony. For the United States, the operation proved that patient preparation can achieve decisive results without American losses. The capture of Victor El Lobo Cardenas gave the victory greater weight. Known as the overseer of fentanyl distribution, Cardenas carried a $10 million bounty and a reputation for brutality. Taken alive from a flipped armored vehicle, he was found with encrypted drives containing maps of smuggling routes, lists of corrupt officials, and detailed logistics for trafficking operations stretching from Arizona to Dallas. In one strike, not only was a battlefield win secured, but valuable intelligence was seized to weaken the cartel's network. Amid the wreckage, one image cut through the destruction. A U.S. soldier was photographed kneeling beside a young fighter who had survived with severe burns. The boy still clutched a bent rifle as the soldier offered him water. That moment of humanity, quiet and unexpected, showed that even in the harshest battles, American troops could act with dignity. It became a symbol of compassion inside violence, reminding viewers that war is not only about victory, but also about values. But beyond casualties and destroyed vehicles, the real message of the operation carried unmistakable political weight. Killbox Bravo proved a decisive truth. Transnational cartels cannot challenge the United States without facing devastating consequences. The battle in the Sonoran Desert was not only a tactical success, it was a political warning written in fire and steel. More than 300 cartel fighters were eliminated or captured, 46 armored vehicles were destroyed, and 6 containers of fentanyl, enough to kill millions, were reduced to ash. Washington showed the world that America can still act with precision and overwhelming force when pushed to the edge. This was deterrence, not just against the Sinaloa cartel, but also against every group watching from the shadows. Yet victory also revealed weakness. If a cartel could assemble a paramilitary convoy, mount heavy weapons, and penetrate into Arizona, then the border is far more fragile than leaders have admitted. Under Trump's administration, border security was often praised as strong, but this operation raised serious doubts. The invasion was not carried out by a few smugglers, but by a heavily armed force acting like a private army. That should unsettle not only officials, but every citizen who believes America's homeland is untouchable. The deeper message of Killbox Bravo is clear. Technology, intelligence, and preparation are the real shields of national security, not slogans or politics. The combination of electronic warfare, precision strikes, and disciplined troops showed how future conflicts must be fought. And from the deserts of Sonora, the echo of this clash carried a silent warning. Complacency or delay could cost America its very territory. History reminds us that war is never only about weapons, but about choices. Every battle reveals the cost of conflict, yet it also reminds us of the value of peace. If this story gave you something to think about, share it and tell us your perspective in the comments. Join us as we explore the lessons behind war and the search for peace. And don't forget, subscribe to Military Power so you won't miss the next chapter in understanding how today's struggles can shape tomorrow's world.